Welcome to Journaling with Nature, the podcast for those who want to turn curiosity into wonder, a pencil sketch into a rabbit hole of discovery, a moment of stillness into a life full of joy. I'm your host, Bethan Burton. Let's open the pages of our nature journals and explore this world together. Hello, this is episode 169. I hope you're doing well this week. Before we jump into the episode, I want to take a moment to express my gratitude for the folks who support this podcast on Patreon. I can honestly say that it wouldn't exist 4 years down the line if it weren't for you and your support. I have so much gratitude for you, and I wanted to say that this episode. So thank you so much. If you're enjoying the podcast and you'd like to support it, there are a few ways that you can do that. You can join us on Patreon, and you'll find the link in the show notes. And the nice thing about that is that you get a chance to ask questions of some of the upcoming guests, because I post them there on Patreon and then I ask your questions during the interview. But there are other ways that you can support the show too. You can leave a 5-star rating on your podcasting app, or you can write a review, or even just sending your favorite episode to a friend also helps a podcast get found by other people who might benefit from these conversations. I'm so looking forward to sharing today's chat with you. I'm talking today with business and personal coach Nix Johnson. On top of her coaching work, Nix is also training to be a forest bathing guide. I love how different these podcast conversations can be. The focus is always different, even though lots of the questions are the same. And this one dives into big ideas and overarching philosophies of humans and nature connection, and how we can make these links with each other and with the natural world, with intentionality and care. Let's listen. Nix, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, Bethan, it's a delight. It's a delight to join you from the other side of the planet.
Yes. And I just love Scotland and the Scottish accent and all the little words that you use. It's so sweet and endearing, all the Scottishisms.
Yeah, I think Scottishism is probably right. I'll try and, if I throw any real wobblers in, I'll kind of explain what they mean, because I appreciate that you've got an large international audience, and the Scottishisms can be occasionally a little bit, a little bit impenetrable. So if there's any whoppers that I throw in, I will make sure and provide a translation.
Well, I remember many, many years ago when I was 19, I think I found myself in Edinburgh, in fact, and we got into a taxi to go from the train station to the place we were staying. And I remember talking with the cab driver and he was speaking English, and I just remember just not really knowing what he was saying in the most delightful way.
Yeah, I think that's definitely could be a high risk strategy for Scotland. Edinburgh in itself actually generally has a little bit more of a softer accent.
Yes.
So and I've lived in Edinburgh for most of my life, but also lived down south, just outside London for a little bit. So when I lived down south, actually, I used to say to people, I don't think I sound Scottish at all in my head.
Yeah.
Whereupon they would follow me laughing, because clearly that wasn't their experience. But in my head, I don't sound that Scottish. But I always say when I'm working with international audience where people's language maybe isn't English as their first language, I always say, I will slow down and I will enunciate as clearly as possible so you don't miss anything. But if it isn't clear, just say, could you just repeat that?
I love it. So I would love to hear your stories of nature in your childhood, nature in your early years, or formative nature experiences that have grown you into who you are and a nature-connected human being.
What a lovely invitation. Yeah, I don't remember. And, I'm a child of the sort of 70s and 80s, so that dates me straight away. But we're always outside. I mean, we just went outside all the time. I'm also an identical twin. So there is two of us. So if any of you ever meet me or hear somebody that sounds extraordinarily similar to me, that will be the other half of the egg. But between my sister and my good friend Polly, the three of us used to just be outside all the time. I can't remember, even in terrible weather, we were just like, okay, we'll just, there you go, there's a Scotticism straight away.
Okay.
Okay, we'll just go out, we'll just go and plod around, be it collecting conkers off the trees, making mud pies. Where I live and where I grew up is basically the same place, and very fortunate to have the Pentland Hills Regional Park. I'm pointing here with my thumb to people on the podcast. You won't be able to see this, but directly behind me, to the south of where I live, is a big regional park, and that's been a huge sort of, I guess, massive playground for us as kids, because we just used to go and disappear into the woods. Yeah. And we would know that dinner was about 5:30, and we'd sort of wander back. There's no phones. I suspect this will be a sort of theme that comes up with a lot of your sort of guests who are of a similar vintage.
Yes, I think you and I are probably the same age. Yeah.
Off we go, never to be seen for the next 6 hours through the school holidays. And so that was a really informative thing. And I think my parents are both keen gardeners. And I think my dad used to spend most of his time trying to wrangle the moss out of the grass, which was, a Sisyphean type task. And, but we were always out, and we'd be out sort of digging the lawn up and playing golf on it and hockey. And so, yes, it's been an integral part of my life growing up. And as I've got older, it's become more important. That sort of maturity of experience, I think, changes, doesn't it? As you'll know this yourself, as a grown up, you start to see things in a slightly different way. And not to get sort of morose about it, but we recognise that we're maybe not going to live forever, which you don't really think about when you're 10. And you then start to see the cycles of life, the intricate balance that exists in nature, and how that then can often give us perspective in our own lives. So it's as I've got older, and as I'm sort of marching towards my half century, I think there's definitely a greater, I guess, intimacy and connection that I feel with nature. So yeah, there you go. That was a long answer to quite a short question.
No, that's absolutely beautiful. And I think what you've described is the experience of many people, that nature in childhood was entirely ubiquitous. It was just nature and childhood are melded in such a way that you can't even, and a lot of people, and I had the same experience, I didn't think about, now I'm in nature. It was just, now I'm being me. And the same as you, like if it was raining, that's like even bigger invitation to go out and get muddy and, dance about and play on whatever crazy thing.
Yeah.
And then when you get older, you can reflect and say, I was really connected to nature. And yet we didn't even label it, because it was so much a part of experience that we didn't need to label it. I think that what you've described is so beautiful, and a common theme, I think, as you say, but because I talk to nature people. But I think, nature and childhood are just so very strongly linked. And I love that you are living where you grew up, and so you have this long line of connection with nature. You said intimacy and connection, and this is gorgeous. And I'd love for you, I really like to get a sense of my guests' environment and what they see when they go outside. And I would love to hear you describe what nature you have access to when you go outside, the forest behind you, and even further afield when you go on nature adventures. Tell me about nature that's accessible to you.
Oh, goodness. Well, I suppose the advantage that we have in Scotland is we've got a vast array of habitats and environments that we can explore. And here in Edinburgh, actually, we're never more than sort of a couple of hours from some form of adventure, either in the mountains of Scotland or, I was out last night down in East Lothian on the coast. Gorgeous, on a nature reserve and a golf course. And, so being able to see that dunes and different, totally different, environment, ecosystems. Saw a weird thing that I'd never seen before: a wild rose with a big wasp gall on it. It looked looked like candy floss, but moss. And that was all because the wasp had laid its eggs inside it, and the rose had just gone, I don't think so, and created
reject.
Like this massive, weird, like cool thing all around it. So, but if I think about local to me, so I can walk out of my front door, I'm very fortunate in this respect, and be in the Pentland Hill Regional Park behind me. And that is a beautiful ecosystem of mixed woodland. We have a bunch of reservoirs that have served Edinburgh since the 1800s for water sources. Upland, moorland type areas. We've got some shooting, grouse shooting. In fact, we've just gone through the shooting season opening here in Scotland, as well as the sort of more alpine type environment. So I am spoilt. I'm also a volunteer ranger for the Pentland Hills Regional Park, so I get to go and enjoy that and share it with others. So that is my close nature. And if I went, instead of going south out of my front door, I went out the back door and down the hill a little bit, I would be in the Water of Leith, which is a beautifully restored natural woodland river habitat that we've now got otters in, we've got kingfishers, and it's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous. So I do feel, and you sort of mentioned that as youngsters it was ubiquitous. I guess I would say that I was privileged to live in a sort of really nice neighbourhood where actually I had immediate access to the big garden to play in. And I recognise then and now that isn't everybody's experience. But fortunately, here in Edinburgh, we have a great bus network, and we have really great accessible regional parks, as well as a very diverse set of green spaces in the Edinburgh area, which hopefully allows people to get into it. But I guess if you haven't had our experience as, I'm going to throw in a Scottish word, as bairns. So bairns for everybody. Bairns are kids or little people, youngsters. If you haven't had that experience as a young person, then how do you know to enjoy it? I was at a book. Yeah, we've got the Edinburgh Book Festival at the moment. Now, we aside here heard a lovely talk by a lady called Dr. Agnes Alexander Foster, who's written a book on nostalgia. And, I think it's easy to look back and sort of go, oh, it was fabulous, blah, 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 blah. And I wonder, there's an element of that, of time and place and how she describes nostalgia. But we can also only look back if that's been our experience.
Yes.
And if it hasn't, then, it becomes more difficult. So, so I am bountifully blessed with a multitude of environments to go and enjoy and explore and reconnect with.
I'm fascinated by the immediacy of the history, and I don't know if that makes sense. We spent some time in the UK recently, last year in fact, and I was amazed that there were castles, and Edinburgh is one of these cities, a castle in the middle of the city, people wandering through history without even noticing it. And, it's so much a part of everyday life that it's unremarkable for people living there. And I'm interested in your take on how culture and history and nature all intertwine in your experience living there.
That's a really great question. And it's interesting, actually, as a local. Yeah, I mean, I can sort of, if I crane my neck, I could probably just about see the castle from where I am. But I don't always think about that when I'm in Edinburgh. It's when I go to places like Rome that you're like, wow.
Yeah, look at this.
Thousands of years of history.
Yeah, that's it.
So, but I think it's a really good question. And it's, as a nation, as a Scottish nation, I think we've always had let's not even worry about countries because they're sort of constructs, aren't they, really? But as a species, that's been our way, is to be, we've only been living in houses and doing industrial things for, 250 years out of millennia of evolution. So our disconnection from nature and our cultural emphasis now is really new. It's really new. And I think that maybe, when we maybe come on to speak about this, maybe speaks to some of the challenges that we have now around disconnection from nature and maybe the term species loneliness that we maybe will see coming up. But I think inherently, as an agrarian species and people who have used the land, we've got a sense that, Scots porridge oats. We still grow oats all over Scotland, and we use them to feed cattle, we use them to feed ourselves, we use them in the whisky industry. you know. So there's still that, I think, heritage linkage between between us and our nature, as well as things like, well, we've got grouse shooting. Is that that might have been a natural thing to do initially, but we've maybe gone right up the road with creating habitats that are not natural in service of a specific part of or section of society, at the expense of others and at the expense of a sort of more balanced ecosystem. It's the same with forestry. I don't know what it's like in Australia. I've sadly never been, but you've got a much more wild. Definitely everything can kill you. There's snakes and spiders and bitey things, and we've got midges, which are annoying and probably keep our tourist number down slightly. But that's about as dangerous as it's going to get. You're not going to get savaged by a haggis in the middle of the Highlands, so you'll be all right. But I think we have certainly. I think that there is still that thread that still links us, and I think when you look at Edinburgh as a city, touched on this earlier, there's that real greenness to it, and that speaks to partly its heritage and its history and how it's been laid out. But maybe this is just a bit sort of dewy-eyed and rose-tinted, that we've maybe thought about the space that we have and considered how we use it and how we maintain a sense of greenness in the city. And maybe it speaks to our economic history as well, as Edinburgh's consistently been sort of the service industry, law, finance, banking, whereas you go to Glasgow and whilst there's some fabulous green spaces there, much more industrial, quite a different feel to it as a city. So I think it sort of depends. I think I've gone right round the houses answering that question on a number of topics, but hopefully it makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Oh gosh, I'm loving this so much. So I would love, there's so many topics I want to talk to you about, but let's get on to nature journaling. And I wonder how that entered the scene. How did you come to nature journaling? What was your first entry point?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I actually think it was, through the International Journaling Week
really?
that I first discovered it. Yes, I think so. And I sort of was like, oh, this is cool. Because I've sort of been interested in sort of observing nature. I did a science degree at university, so I'm a bit of a geek in terms of science, but there was something about that felt almost a little bit superficial. Not that science is superficial, but you know what I mean in terms of an emotional connection.
Yes.
So I think I'd spotted the International Journaling Week on probably Facebook or Instagram, and then sort of dropped into that thread, and then sort of discovered John Muir Laws. I was like, oh, brilliant. All the while thinking, but Nix, you are not an artist. You do not draw. And my partner is an artist. She's a professional artist for a living. That's what she does.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm like, oh, hell's bells. Here we go. Get the crayons out, Nix. Get a paintbrush. See what you can do. So that was sort of my really sort of initial foray into it, was just sort of discovering that opportunity to think about it just for a small part of the year, for a whole week, and then starting to pull on those threads of the sort of experts like yourself and John, and I've got another book over here by, I think it's Caroline Leslie. Would that be right? I think she's
Claire Walker Leslie.
Claire Leslie. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Aspirational level.
She's amazing.
Aspirational level. But that really sort of drew me in, because there's a lot of creative practices I've sort of taken up. Because as somebody who's done a knowledge-based job, I've never made widgets for a living. I've just sold things to people and had conversations. And there's a lack of tangibility. The thing about nature journaling or knitting or crocheting or, spoon carving or whatever the sort of creative craziness that I get up to, it's tangible.
Yeah.
You can observe, you can do, you can see, you can touch, you can smell, you can rip back your knitting 4 or 5 times if you've screwed it up. But there's something somatically linking between the hand, the mind, and the heart. And that I think that probably is what helped me to get into it more fully. Because I remember seeing International Nature Journaling last year, 23, and then really dug into it fully this year. So, I love it.
This year, I really enjoyed watching you respond to the prompts. And this year we had prompts that were guided by processes in the natural world, but all of those things could have equally been turned inward to our own inner experience. And I felt like this for you was something you sort of sunk your teeth into in a beautiful way, and I loved watching your responses to those. And maybe we can talk about that, how nature teaches us things, how we can reflect outwardly and inwardly in nature journaling. I'd love to hear your response to that.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous question. And I think it's, I think it comes back to that perspective setting. So part of what I do is I coach people. I'm an executive leadership personal coach. And I do a bit of the coaching that I do outside. I take people on walks and we go out and we wander around. And that is principally because of, there's a couple of things. One, when we're moving, it can sort of release our ability to talk. You'll know, and I don't know how old your little fellow is, but if you're in a car with a teenager, there's some of the best conversations you'll ever have.
Yes.
You're not looking at each other.
My niece is like this. If you drive her to the station, she just tells you everything.
You'll get the whole 9 yards. Yeah. And so walking coaching brings in that sense of movement. So sort of back to sort of the Greeks, peripatetic thought and movement. Then the sort of less intensity of the side by side, and then nature as a facilitator. It gives us wonderful perspective of, the transience, the permanence, and the sort of mutability of all of the species, including ourselves, that are, exposed to nature. And I think that, is a big thing. And my own personal experience, having gone through a period of burnout, I used to sit in the woods. I built myself an entire little shelter and sat in the woods and just sort of thought, what am I doing? How am I going to get through this? How am I going to reconnect with myself? Because I'd lost that. I'd lost that sense of why I was doing what I was doing. Just quite a deep hole. Even it's a bit like being a doctor. If you're a coach, you might know how to get people out of it, but you don't. Doesn't stop you falling in the hole in the first place. So that personal experience of being able to just disconnect with everything else and reconnect with my heart and the natural setting, the woods that I was able to visit, really sort of connects me to maybe it's not much deeper, but a deeper experience of nature journaling, because there's lots of things, little sparks that fly off when I think about things and how I'm always loving a metaphor, how that, like the rose gall, that I talked about before we came on recording, that's a response to an injury. As human beings, what is our emotional response to an injury? What barriers do we put up around ourselves that stop us developing intimacy and vulnerability in the future because of a hurt that we've experienced? That rose gall's done that. It's got little wasps living in it. Yeah. But what's the sort of analogous experience we might have felt we've been humiliated or hurt or, angered in a situation, and that knocks our trajectory into a way of being. And if we aren't able to sort of pick up on that and notice that, then how does that change the direction of the way that we'll experience our lives moving forward? So for me, the natural sort of responses to things are they're just much more immediate. We've got much more cerebral interpretations of things, but they're really analogous. You can really pull some gorgeous, I think they're gorgeous, everybody else might think they're nonsense, but some really gorgeous analogies and metaphors through from nature, and the nature journaling just is a great excuse to do that at a deeper level and to really drop into it more fully.
Yeah, that's a beautiful answer. And I think Well, since COVID, I feel like the nature journaling space has just expanded in such a beautiful way that people want this. People want connection, and
Mm-hmm.
they want intimacy with the natural world and with each other. And I think that that comes through, if you want it, it comes through in the nature journal community, that we're ready to be authentic. And I'd love to speak to you a little about this craving for authenticity. We touched on it before we started recording, but I want to speak again here about it. This need for authenticity, or this desire for what's real, what's true, what's natural, what's human, because we're moving as a society towards AI, towards, filters on people's faces and curated feeds and all this. But I think we're facing and craving a swing towards natural, authentic, intimate, honest stuff. And I'd love your take on that, because I know that you have, that AI has been part of your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's such an important question, because we are in strange times. We're in strange times. And, probably our ancestors said this too. So, it's not unique to us. But there are some unusual and specific challenges that we face, in this 21st century that our ancestors didn't face. And I think the rise of technology, we have to be careful that actually we don't just chuck it all in the, this is terrible.
Yeah.
It's awful. Listen, I would never have met you if it wasn't for Instagram and Facebook and the technology thing. So in some respects, the opportunity that technology gives us to connect is vast.
Yes.
And it can be quite one-dimensional. And we only see one slice. You talked about filters there. Sometimes we don't even see the real slice.
Yes.
And being able to connect with people on a much deeper level, that's how stuff gets done.
Yeah.
That's how the world changes. That's how you're able to say, this is the magic that I do. It seems similar to the magic that you do.
Yeah.
Can we go and do more magic
and
and actually make the world a wee bit better tomorrow than it was today? And I think that people are maybe recognising that. And maybe that's, there's a little bit of existential dread about the state of the planet. Maybe we're sort of looking at AI and going, the robots are going to take our jobs. Well, maybe's aye, maybe's no. There's a good Scottish phrase for you. Maybe yes, maybe no. My experience of AI is that it's got enormous potential, and it's only as good as what we put in it. Where its beauty and where its capability lies is where we bring the human creativity, emotion, creativity together with the massive power of data chunking and sort of meaning making of all that with artificial intelligence. And that will undoubtedly let us do amazing things. It's already letting us do extraordinary things in cancer screening and that side of things. So there is great opportunity. But how we as a species, we've grown up in community, and somebody like Simon Sinek, for example, you would talk about tribes, and 10 people or 50 people or 150 is about the sort of level of intimacy that most humans can hold close relationship with. Beyond that, it becomes more difficult. So really being able to reconnect with individuals, to know who people are at their true core, then really gives you the opportunity to say, well, I feel part of something. Yes. I don't feel like I'm just little me, because if you go onto Instagram, it's like, be like me and, you'll get this, or buy these trousers and you'll be able to do that. Have that Bugatti and you'll be able to, no, stop it, right? Who are you as a human being, and what magic do you have to bring to the world? Because we all need that. The kids in the UK here, well, in England, and anyone doing A-levels have just got their exam results this morning.
Oh, wow.
Big day.
Yes.
Big day. I remember when I got my exams, I was like, oh dear, I'll not be going to be a vet then. I'll do something different. But they've all got magic in them, whatever the results were. And we need to see that. We need to see who those true humans are, because nobody can be them like they can be them. I often say that to people, don't be anybody else other than you. Yeah. Nobody can do you like you do you. And we need to see that from people. And how we're able to draw that out, how we're able to give people the sense of safety to be able to go, yeah, I have no idea what I am doing. Can you help me? Or I've just totally dropped the ball on that. Can you help me? Or I'm frightened. Or I'm uncertain. Or I'm furious.
Yeah.
How do we sort of tap into that? Because actually, we need that as a species. We've not grown up as individuals. We've grown up as a species in collective community. And the only way to do that well is through authenticity.
It really gives me goosebumps when you talk about that, about rawness of emotion, about the reality of what it is to be human, because we do experience rage, we experience jealousy, we experience sadness, we experience joy, we experience happiness and connection. And to show all of those things is to invite intimacy. We talked about intimacy, and that's what it is. That's what being human is all about, is connecting. And I think we can do that through technology. I know we can, because I have made some amazing, amazing friends, and I met a bunch of them last year when we traveled in Europe. I met some of my amazing friends that were my internet friends, but I had a heart connection with them, and then amazing, they turned into real people, and that connection was there, but it was made through zeros and ones, and it's possible to do it if we do it in the right way. And I think we can if we intend to do it.
Yeah, I think that's dead right. I think intentionality, I use that word so much in the work that I do. Intentionality, what is it you're intending to do? And then the intent, impact intended versus impact felt. How does that show up? But I love that sort of idea of heart connection. That's gorgeous, Beth, and that's gorgeous, because that's what it is. We can intellectually connect with people, but who are they? Who are they really? Who are they when they sort of land out of bed in the morning and their hair's everywhere, and maybe one eye stuck shut, and they're all over the place. Who's that person? I want to know them. I don't care. I want to know who you are. And I think that trying to get that across to everybody, but especially young people, I just sort of think, just please be you. Yeah. We don't need 100 influencers, 100 million influencers. We don't need people to all have, on fleek eyebrows or whatever the phrase is. Yeah. Not a makeup wearer, so I've no idea. But, all of that sort of shenanigans. No, just be you. Yeah. Just be you. Let that awesomeness, that beauty, that all of that shine through, because we need that. People in your life, it's that lovely Maya Angelou phrase, people forget what you say. We're on a podcast, so hopefully not. But people forget what you say, but they'll not forget how you made them feel.
Yes. I love this.
That core. Whose life are you going to touch today that they're going to go, do you know what? That was lovely. Just held the door open for me. Yeah. Somebody bought me a cup of tea. Or somebody smiled and said, your jacket's gorgeous. Yeah. It looks amazing today. Tiny, tiny acts of kindness in the face of, if you turn the telly on, I don't know what it's like in Australia, but here in the UK, you're like, oh, I'll hide under a rock. And you turn the telly on. No, stop that. For every bad news story, you should have 10 good ones. Yeah. Because the people are good. And we only learn that when we connect with them. If we only see the superfluous media coverage, you'd be thinking, I'm not leaving my house. But the connection, the heart connection, as you called it, that's where we get to realise that actually as a species, there's magic. And that magic will help us. It will help us connect with our planet, and it will help us make our planet habitable well into the future. So I just think it's so important.
Nix, this is beautiful, and I think from reading what you put out there into the world, I know you do coaching, and I know that you also do forest bathing and lead nature journaling, and one thing that you've put out there is this ability to see the awesomeness in people, and I think that this is really valuable to meet someone in whatever context, be it in a forest bathing session, be it in a coaching session or a nature journaling session or on the street, and to face that person with the and maybe we go back to intention, but with the view that I intend to see the awesomeness in you. I think this is a really special way to be in the world.
I think I think we have to be open-hearted to people, you know. We're not always at our best. I know I'm not always at my best, but I'm going to give everybody the benefit of the doubt until they've punched me in the eye or been awful, that they're a good person. Because we've all got it, you know, we've all got it in us. And that's part of the challenge with where we are today, with this sort of isolation sort of politics and, you know, all of the different levels of prejudice that we see.
Yeah.
You know, as somebody who's in the LGBTQ community, you're like that, you know, no, stop it. We are all human beings. We all want to be safe. We all want to be loved. We all want to love. We always, you know, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, all of this is about, we're not seeing the individuals and how awesome they can be. We're painting an entire swathe of humanity with one brush. To what end? To what end are we doing that? Whereas we come back to individuals and we do that connection piece, and you're like, oh, I've just had my, you know, my mind changed on that. And when we're open-hearted and we come to relationship, we come to connection with abundance, what does that let us do? What would it let us, how would it let us see the world? You know, and we're maybe shouting into the wind here, Beth, and on a big geopolitical conversation. But, you know, it starts with one individual.
Yeah.
It's the old butterfly flaps its world. It was wings on one side of the world, and, you know, it's a hurricane on the other side of the world. How do we've all got power in us to do that. And it's one connection at a time.
Yeah. I really agree with that. I'd love to hear you speak about nature journaling as a mindfulness practice. I think that this is a part of your experience of nature journaling, and I'd love to hear you describe what that's like.
Yeah, it really is. And you touched on there the forest bathing work that I'm training to do, and finish that up later this year. That's all about mindfulness and meditation. And people can get a wee bit like, oh, mindfulness, what is that? It's just about being here in the moment. And in meditation, we just use our breath, because actually you've always got it with you.
Yes.
Hopefully. So you can just reconnect with that. And we call meditation a sort of formal mindfulness practice. Nature journaling is what I would describe as an informal mindfulness practice. But you cannot, trust me, people, I'm not an artist, but I can tell you right now, y'all cannot draw stuff if you do not look at it. You need to be absolutely in the moment and in that place, looking. My partner says to me all the time, did you look at that when you drew it? I was like, nope. She's like, well, go back and look at it then. You know, we have to observe keenly. We have to have that awareness. And when you really get into that sort of idea of flow when you're nature journaling, wow, that is mindful.
Yeah.
That is mindful, because you're just so consumed. You're not thinking about, you know, as adults, you know, whether everybody's going to get their tea later on, or what you're going to do in that meeting tomorrow, or did you really annoy your boss in that conversation you had earlier on? You're not doing any of that. You're just like, what am I seeing here? You know, is that a pink, or is it maybe a more red tone? What pencil might I use for that? Or what brush would I use? Or what have I noticed that I'm going to, you know, pull out? And actually, John Muir Law's I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of the most gorgeous rubric. I've used that in coaching. I translated it straight out of nature journaling, because it implores us, it invites us to stop and make an assessment, to say, what am I seeing? What does it make me think of? You know, what does it make me wonder? And those are, you know, they can only happen when you're there. And that's, I think, where the real mindfulness sort of activity comes to nature journaling. Because, as I say, your drawings will be absolutely comedy gold if you're not looking at the thing you're trying to represent on your page. I mean, I've got some whoppers. I'm sure you have in your journal when you're like that. Totally. Oh dear.
Tell me about the experience of having a partner who is an artist, and how that goes about, how you go about that, because it sounds like you have an inbuilt source of expertise that you can draw on. I've seen a post you made about rating her art supplies.
Oh yeah, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. There's lots of different aspects to it. So as somebody who trained as a scientist and didn't really do art beyond sort of standard group, sort of 15, 16 at school, I would never have considered myself in any way artistic. And always quite scientific, quite rational. When your partner is an artist, it brings a completely different perspective to your world. Who knew you could describe green in so many different ways? Yeah. Sage, eucalyptus, I know how Farrow and Ball come up with their paint names. Elephant's breath. I mean, just like a bazillion different ways to describe colour and to see colour. Whereas I go, oh, it's green. Chris will be like that. No, that's duck egg. Maybe sage with a touch of eucalyptus. So, colour theory, a whole new concept. But yeah, absolutely raiding art supplies. Chris's work is more in the sort of abstract landscape space. But she's a spectacular drawer. So she'll say to me, what's happening with your perspective there? It all looks a bit flat. I'm like, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing with perspective. And she'll say, well, here, let's sit down and have a draw at it.
That's great.
There's a couple of things. There's the technical sort of capabilities and goodies. And there's also a way of being and seeing the world
yeah.
that is different. So bringing a new perspective to how I actually consider things, which is just wonderful.
Yeah.
It's so enriching.
One thing that I notice in your recent pages is leaning into the activity of play and playing, like maybe with abstraction, with color, with different marks on the page. Play for me is where it begins. It's the reason for everything. Generating joy is what it's all about for me, and that's where it comes from. Play is where it comes from. I'd love to hear you speak about play.
Yeah, it's. Are you frightened when you're playing?
No.
So what does it let you do?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. And as adults, I mean, if you watch your kids playing, they'll be like, they'll be talking a different language that nobody understands. They'll have made a rocket ship out of a toilet roll. It is abundantly creative and innovative. And the work that I do in coaching, but also in consultancy, innovation is such a big thing.
Yeah.
And we're going to go full circle here, Bethan. Innovation cannot happen if you don't feel safe. And you only feel safe when you've created intimacy. And you can only do that when you feel free to play. Play is where the magic happens. And when we're able to unburden ourselves of that, well, it needs to be this way, or it needs to be that way, or that's, trust me, nobody got to the moon because they were playing it safe, right?
Yeah,
they were playing at ideas of how they could actually do that. That innovation came from a sort of creativity, albeit a well-grounded one in engineering and rocket science. But, they had a dream. Somebody had a dream and went, we could go to the moon. With no idea of how they were going to do that.
Yeah.
And the only way to find that out is through play, through experimentation. Amy Edmondson's beautiful work on psychological safety and thinking like a scientist, in order to play and learn, we need to get it wrong. We need to fail. We need to fall over and skin our knees. So you need to be then open to that ability to go, I am going to try this, and it might actually just look like a complete dog's breakfast. So be it. Yeah. Because in that, I will learn something, and it's just such a rich space. And if we think, well, it can only be done one way, as I say, we would never have got to the moon.
Yeah.
We would never have discovered that actually turkey tails, for example, in nature, fantastic little mushrooms that we get on trees, have potentially uses in cancer treatment. We would never have, cholesterol busting drugs come from the Amazon. Who knew? But we wouldn't have got, that innovation, play, creativity, learning, failing, growing. That's all part of the same cycle. And, you know, especially something artistic where maybe there's a whole sort of swathe of humanity we've been told, maybe you just leave the pens and pencils, you know, over there. Because, like, what is that you've just drawn? No. What would it let you experience that would then inform other parts of your life?
Yeah.
You know, if you were able to draw a really this is my level, a really fantastic stick person, what would you learn from that? We could draw other stick people. And then you might give them shoes or clothes or something. But all of the time you're learning, you're refining your skill. And that is so translatable into whatever it is that we choose to do. And that, what would you dial the curiosity up to 11. What would it let you do?
Yeah. I love not being, I feel like as I go on in my life's journey, I get less and less and less attached to perfectionism. And I've spoken to some people on this podcast who have also said, like, my pages are getting messier and messier. And I love, because I have nature journal, you know, huge stack of nature journals, I take them with me to my workshops, and I'm often just using them as teaching tools to describe this is what a nature journal can look like. And I love to show the pages that are just, like you say, stick animals with, or like scribbles or some splotches of ink in a messy, you know, in a total mess, because that gives people permission to play, to open up, to not do it right, in inverted commas. I think it's really important, and, you know, we interface with each other on social media, and of course we take the best pictures of our best pages for social media, but the reality is my nature journal, most of the pages are messy stick animals that look ridiculous, and I think that's important. I think that it's important to show those pages to each other and say, this silliness is where it's at.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, you know, it just, that there's just so much richness in completely drawing something that you're like, what is that? You know, or get like mixing colour. I mean, good Lord. I mean, I can mix stuff and I'm like, I have no idea how I did that. And sometimes you just get it completely wrong. You go, that bean was never that colour. That was never that colour. But, you know, so be it. So be it. If you learn how to mix a really lurid green that nothing in nature looks like, but, you know, never mind.
And I say this in my workshops, like, okay, so you've mixed a colour that doesn't feel correct, so put it on your page and right next to it, this isn't the green that I was going for, or whatever. You know, you can do this. Then that's why words help us. And that's the beauty about nature journaling. We're not making perfect art. We're using words and pictures to describe things that we see. And I love on some of your pages you have what you've written, wildlife encounters, and then you write the dot points of your wildlife encounter. And I think this is really freeing, because a lot of people think, oh, a nature journal is an art piece or an art journal, and it can be that if that connects you, but words are there to help us describe the things that we can't paint in the way we want to. And I love how you do this. You've got lots of descriptions of, and then this happened and then that happened in dot point form. It's really, it makes it accessible, I think.
Thank you. It's I don't think there's a right way to do this nature journaling thing. I think that's the thing, you know, and sometimes the most terrifying thing you can be confronted of, especially as a new nature journaler / art experimenter, is a blank page. Yeah. Oh, hell's bells. You know, terrifying. So I've started to do things that sort of get me started. Simple things like writing the date at the top of the page. Well, there's now a mark on it. Get at it. You know, you've sort of like got rid of that newness.
Yes.
Or maybe, you know, things like, I was really inspired by your August sort of circle of the moon phases, the temperature. It's like, I love that. I mean, I've obviously started mine in the middle of the month, so I'll maybe do a circle thing for September. But even stuff like that you know you're replicating. I'm going to put what the day is. I'm going to put what the moon phase, what was sunrise, what was the temperature. Stuff that is kind of easy to replicate and gets you going.
Yeah.
You're then sort of freed up to go, well, what's the rest of the page going to look like? And I really like sort of combining the two, because definitely there's things that I could absolutely definitely not represent in art that I could definitely write things about. So just for me, and it's a sort of contemporaneous note of that day. And I'd love to know. I mean, I haven't got that many journals. You've been doing this much longer than I have. What, you take your stuff to your workshops, but what do you do with all your stuff? I mean, I'm just like that. What am I going to do with all these journals once I fill them?
It's funny because they're so much a part of me, they're so much a part of my life. I mean, I was reflecting recently that if I'm building this garden journal very specifically for my veggie garden at the moment, and I was thinking, this is so precious to me that if of all the things if my house was on fire, I would take my kid and my garden journal. Like, that would be my thing, you know. And so I know where all the entries are in each of my journals. It's an interesting feeling. I had a open studio thing for the first time recently, and people were coming into my studio and asking about this and that, and we'd have conversations about different species, and I would say, oh yeah, I've got an entry about that, and I'd just flick to it. Like, I just know where they are. I don't know why. Maybe because I use them for teaching, but I just love looking at them, and I love the way that when you open it, you remember with your full body, with all of the senses, what you were feeling, what you were doing, what you were hearing and smelling and experiencing in that moment. So I do actually love just poring over them and looking back at them.
That's gorgeous. I really love that idea of, because they're a real working journal for you as well. Yes. I think, you know, in gardening terms, you know, what am I putting there? When's it going in? How do you get on, etc. It's a really lovely contemporaneous journal that has inherent value for you having a more successful garden the following year.
Yeah.
But that, like you say, just coming back to that, it comes a little bit back to that sort of nostalgia piece that I was talking about before we started. Just really reconnecting you with a moment and going, I remember how the beautiful smell of the trees that day, or, you know, how the sun was falling across the garden, or, you know, what you maybe did with your special people. You know, that's a lovely thing to be able to reconnect with. And I can imagine that I'll need to find more sort of shelf space, move some books out of here, and hopefully stick some journals in there. But I think also seeing your evolution of your practice and how your journal changes, I'd love to know how that has felt for you. Like, you're doing the interview, but I know I'm asking you questions. How that's changed over your journey with your journals.
It's interesting. So I've got one journal, and I know all this because I have been sort of looking over them because of this open studio, and I also put some at a local environment centre in a display case, and so I've kind of thought a lot about it. And so I've got my very, very first one, which was for a university field studies course, which was a sciencey one. And then 10 years later, so that was 2002, 2012, I started doing it for myself. And that one's a very, very personal one. It's got a lot of writing. And while I'm not really describing my inner feelings sometimes, but mostly just really intimately describing what I'm experiencing in the natural world in that moment, that journal was really important for my healing. I was going through a healing journey from a chronic illness, and so that one has its own feeling. It's got it's interesting to note how much I'm writing, way more writing than drawing in that one. And then I abandoned it halfway through because it was the wrong paper. It was my first sort of one, and the paper was too flimsy, and so then I upped my game and I started using watercolor journals and other things. But it's interesting because I see some nature journalers who have the same journal, and they'd be able to put their journals on a shelf very neatly and nicely because they've found the right journal and put, you know, gone through the years with the same journal. but mine are all different shapes and sizes. It's ridiculous how many different shapes and sizes. And I've got some that are, most of them are half finished because I'll think, oh, I want to do a watercolor, like deep dive into watercolor. So I'll get out this journal, and then I'll say, oh, I want to do this other thing on toned paper. So I'll get out my toned paper. None of my journals until recently, they're not chronological. They just jump around from journal to journal. So I can't pick up the journal and say, oh, this was 2015's journal, which is a shame because I'd like to be able to do that. But then recently I've sort of settled on the format and the shape and the size that I really like. And I have a few. I've got a perpetual journal, which I'm really awful at keeping for some reason. I've got an everyday journal. I've got a garden journal and then a journal that I use when I'm taking online workshops. So I've got 4 similar shape and size journals, and usually I jump between my garden journal and my everyday journal at the moment. And it's nice to have them in, like, this is what I'm experiencing in chronological order. I like that. Do you jump around between journals?
Yeah, I've got... Yeah, I think what you just described there about the sort of playing with your medium, I've got... Yeah. It looks a little bit like a day out at Hobby Lobby, to be honest with you. There's quite a selection of things. But I totally agree with you on the paper. You need some decent paper. If you're going to throw a heap of water and paint at something, it needs to be a bit better than what you can buy for the printer.
Yeah, that's
Otherwise, it's just going to dissolve. So I've probably got 3 going at the moment. So I've got one that I took, had a couple of holidays in Europe over the summer. And I thought, because you've got time then, and you're somewhere different, I was like, I'm just going to get lashed into those. So I've done a bit in those ones. And then I've got one that's kind of gone a little bit freestyle at the start. So there's been some like abstract watercolor work done on some free paper. Yeah. And then a little bit of perspective sketching. And then I've started to really do a more chronological piece in that one. And then I've got some little ones. I don't know if I've got any in here, actually. Little A5 ones that I think when I do take my nature reconnection stuff outside and invite people to come with me on it, are a great little size with a wee bit of, just a wee bit of ply, a wee bit of 11mm ply behind it and a bulldog clip, that are much more portable. And they also, they're not expensive, so they're kind of a little bit less imposing as a journal medium, so people aren't like, well, this looks expensive, heavy paper. I can't possibly put something on it. Whereas they'll be like, oh, this is great. It's attached to a crappy piece of plywood with a bulldog clip and I've got a pencil. Hold my beer. I'll get at it. So I think there's that sort of jumping around your mediums lets you bring a creativity to your journaling. And again, back to that sort of concept of play, lets you try stuff. I've never tried toned paper.
Yeah.
I quite like the idea of toned paper.
Fun.
I've seen it used, you've seen use it very effectively, but also seen somebody like John Muir Laws use it really effectively. I'm like, ooh, you can make the white pencil actually do something in the toned paper. So I think, again, it's that creativity and playfulness that having multiple journals lets you explore, lets you sort of dive down different avenues and spark ideas.
Yeah, being outside of any sort of constraints is so lovely. Tell me about nature journaling on your holidays on the continent. Tell me how that feels to be journaling outside, because you live in an environment you've been in, from the beginning, and it's familiar, and maybe you know a lot of the species and the things that you're encountering. What's it like to be in a new landscape and to be nature journaling?
It's lovely. It means that anybody's going for a walk, mate. I mean, I'm pretty bad when I go for a walk. I'm like, ooh, what's that? But when you're somewhere you don't know things, you're like, hang on a minute, get the old sea cap out and find out what it is you're looking at. I think there's a couple of reasons that it's different. One is because you don't know the area, and you maybe don't know the flora and fauna. So I was in the south of France, just outside Carcassonne, beautiful vineyard, spectacular. Quite Mediterranean climate, and then I was over in Mallorca and the Balearic Islands. Very Mediterranean, very dry, hot. So some similar plants and some completely different plants, and some similar species actually. we don't get large carpenter bees we don't get them in Edinburgh, put it that way. You might get them in the south of England, but oh my God, they're amazing. They're amazing. They're massive. They sound like an Apache helicopter, and they're about an inch. The big ones are about an inch in length, and they've got this gorgeous blue iridescence to their blackness. You see that against something like a beautiful, salvia, delicate white and pink, and you're like, wow, that really pops. So you're seeing things, maybe for the first time. So there's that sort of real sense of a beginner's mind when you're looking at things. And also you're in a more relaxed setting. I think that's, so you've got time. Like I could spend 2 hours sketching something out, and then I could muck around with my paints and get into that, because I was on holiday. I had time, and you're unburdened by all of the other responsibilities of the day to day. So I think there's a bunch of things in there. I tell you, the other thing that's tricky about being in a hot climate, and you'll maybe know this being in Brisbane, watercolours.
Yeah.
Dry super quick. I mean, trying to do plein air kind of painting, I've no idea how you do that in a hot climate, because everything's dry. In some ways it's great, but everything's dry before you've even got a chance to add more paint to something. So I love that, being able to see things for the first time.
Yeah.
With a relaxed mind and with the time to enjoy them. Is a real privilege of being on a holiday and taking a journal with you. And back to what you said earlier on, you've got this sort of note, this set of timelines or experiences as drawings that you can go back to and go, I look at that and I can just feel the heat and smell the rosemary and thyme and lavender because of the heat of the day in that little courtyard when I look at that painting. What? That's like a wee time machine.
Yeah.
That's cool.
It is. And it's not just, like you say, you're dropped there. It's not just a one-dimensional memory in the mind. It's like a full-body memory, which is so beautiful.
It's lovely.
You've explored the bees in your own backyard as well.
Backyard bees.
Yeah.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Oh, our wee bees. I mean, I'm sure you've got epic bees in Australia. And we've got a lot of bees here in the UK, but they're just so cool.
They are.
And they're so crucial, and we need to stop pesticising them to death.
Yes.
They're just gorgeous. They're gorgeous. And actually, I'm reading a book called Losing Eden. I can't remember who the author is. And she's got a piece in the foreword of her book that talks about a time in the future when we don't have nature. And the granny's explaining to her granddaughter that bees are like little fuzzy bears that fly around, and they go to the plants and they take the nectar out and they make honey. She's like, wow, a fuzzy bear that flies. Gorgeous description of a bee.
Yes.
But they're so, I don't know, they're just so industrious, and they're like everything in nature. They're just doing what they do. They're just doing what they do. They're just surviving. To absorb, to spend time listening to them and seeing the differences in them. Because otherwise you just got a bumblebee. Oh no. There are many bumblebees. There's more than, there's honeybees, there's blaeberry bees, there's, wood bumblebees. There's so many different bees. And even in a small back garden, I was like, oh, look at all these little bees.
Yeah.
So I just think there's a joy in it. And again, that's back to that playing. I'll stand in front of the ceanothus in June, which is a beautiful powder blue, covered in blooms, absolutely hoaching. There, that's the Scottish. There's hoaching. I better explain. Hoaching, super busy, like a mall on a Saturday when everybody's in for the Black Friday sale. Hoaching with bees of all descriptions, and they're all just buzzing about, doing their own thing, and it's a privilege to stand and just enjoy that for a few minutes of a day.
We in Australia have lots of solitary bees, and one of them does this weird thing, and I didn't know this until I saw one and then researched it. This was a long time ago, but
I was noticing on one of my plants perfect circles cut from it. And in fact, one day I was sitting out there and a bee comes along and cuts this perfect circle and takes the little piece of leaf away, and this is a leaf cutter bee, and it's just the most amazing thing to interact with the environment in that way. And I was watching, we have a native beehive here, and I just recently moved it into my vegetable garden to give them some more access to flowers. And I was watching them today. I was worried that I had moved them not in the right way, because you can disorient them and they weren't coming out. And I had worried that I had messed up the health of this hive. But today they started coming out, and I don't know for sure, but it looked like they were house cleaning or spring cleaning, because they were like hundreds of them coming out of the hive, but carrying something. And I don't know what they were doing with it, but it to me looked like they were housekeeping. And yeah, I'm with you. I just love watching them. I just think they're amazing. I love seeing them at the flowers. We don't have bumblebees. The first time I saw a bumblebee was in Tasmania, which is part of Australia, but an island. And they, for some reason, have bumblebees, but we don't. And I was like that, like your experience on the continent, seeing a giant bee. To me, a bumblebee was just this incredibly large, fascinating, fuzzy thing floating about.
Yeah, they're dead cute, and it's lovely, because all of that, we wouldn't, if we didn't slow down, if we didn't take the time, if we didn't sort of get away from our phones or our computers, you would never notice that.
Yeah,
and there's joy in it.
Yeah,
there's real joy in it, to notice that the bees in your hive are doing their spring cleaning.
Yeah.
They're getting ready for the summer. They're getting ready to, create honey and bring on their next, generation of baby bees. It just, there's joy in that. And I think when we've talked about connection for all the time we've been talking here. When we observe something and we're able, I think you talked about this with Mary Jo Hoffman about Simone Weil's work.
Yes.
That sort of where we put our attention was where we put our love, and that connection and awareness and sense of, wow, how would that let us view the world differently? If you watched all those little bees pour out of their hive and then thought, I'm just going to go and spray my field with insecticide and it's going to kill them.
Yeah.
You might think twice.
You don't do that.
You might just think twice about doing it, eh?
Yeah. You're right.
So I think that, and for me, that's talking to some, good friends up here in Edinburgh, that sort of sense of, we have to start looking at our planet in a different way, and if nature journaling helps people to go, we've got no more May. May's probably not, it's not, you won't be doing no more May in Australia because it'll be the winter. But up here, no more May, leave your grass.
Yeah.
Don't cut it. Leave it a little bit longer. Who cares? You're not playing golf on it. Just, what would it let your near nature be able to do if you left your lawn a little bit longer?
Yeah.
They'd have a better, easier time of it. And if we started a bit like the connection, the 1 to 1 to 1 to 1, if I did it and my neighbours did it and everybody in my street did it, well, that's 50 houses.
Yes.
What if everybody in Edinburgh did it? That's a whole community. That's nearly 1 million people. What would happen if a country did it? So, it's that sort of sense of going, we just need to notice. And when we notice, we can build a connection. And when we build a connection, we can care. And when we care, we'll maintain it. We'll look after it. We'll get a sense of our connection and our inherent necessity for the natural world, rather than just going, it's a resource. It's something that we can use, and well, it'll run out, and then we'll really be screwed. So we need to, especially for youngsters, you've got little ones, how they inherit their planet is contingent on us going, time to reel back on some of the stuff that we've been doing.
Yes.
So that our nature can thrive. But yeah, the bees. They're just gorgeous.
Nix, it has been an utter joy to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much for this.
Oh, it's honestly, I was delighted when we connected and you suggested that we jump on a podcast. It's honestly been my absolute pleasure to share this time with you, with a fellow human who just has that real sort of sense of connection, a real heart connection, Bethan. And it really, honestly, it's been absolutely my pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Nix. I just adored the energy of this chat and diving into big questions and big thoughts about what it is to be human and how to make meaningful connections with nature and with each other. To learn more about Nix, her coaching work, and see her nature journal, follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Thanks so much for listening. See you next week.